Today we have Kirk Donaghey with us. Kirk has recently transitioned from a learning experience manager to a standards and frameworks manager at Optus, Australia. He spent more than 10 years in learning and development at Optus and Suncorp Bank. Kirk is an accomplished people leader focused on coaching and development to achieve performance growth. Kirk, why don't you share with us what's your journey been like and what takes you? And before that, a very warm welcome.
Thank you, Amit. Pleasure to be here. I suppose going right back, my journey began purely as a passion about supporting people and passing on knowledge and best practices. So you mentioned in my intro that I worked at Suncorp Bank for a while, and I started there in quite a junior position, but really had a passion for making sure that everyone was clear and capable and knew what they needed to do, and that developed into a career in L&D. And here I am, more than 10 years later, looking back at that, and it's been quite a journey. And I moved into sort of facilitation and was looking after sort of regions of areas, and then actually stepped away from L&D for a short period and moved into more people management, so more sales related roles, so leading sales teams and those types of things, which is quite common in that finance space. Then worked as an individual, so I had my own sort of responsibilities, no direct reports, but just managing myself, which was interesting, again in the sales role, and then use that to sort of circle back into that L&D coaching and development space, and it's been really good. So I started with Optus now about 6 years ago, and what we called a senior learning consultant, which was around supporting all different projects and a team of people, and then within Optus have moved around into design and delivery roles, learning experience manager, and then most recently I've moved into the standards and frameworks manager role, which is kind of an offshoot from the learning experience role. So what's really there is my remit as learning experience manager was to look at the way that we did things to make sure that our experience was strong. But I also had a team of designers and facilitators who were sitting underneath me. And so now it's purely me and one other who are working around that design standards and frameworks component. How do we do things within Optus? What's the best practice? What are other sort of models that we can use to help support our end users? And those facilitators and designers are in a different team. So I help influence what they do, but they don't report into me anymore.
Yeah. So like the name suggests, you kind of setting standards and frameworks for a wider range of individuals to work with, so that there is consistency and quality that you can really
Correct. Yeah. And it's funny too, because it was always, like I said, part of the remit, but it was something that probably didn't get as much focus as it should have had. It was always kind of like, when we get to that, we'll look at how we do things, but we're too busy reacting to what the business is asking for. So, which took up a lot of our time. So now, by moving those two sort of teams or separating them, it actually means that we're executing better on those requirements. Yeah.
Fantastic. In fact, that's kind of very interesting, that unless we give that sort of focus to that area, you may not be able to contribute so much. So hopefully that's going to be exciting. I know you've just moved into that role, just maybe a month or so.
Yeah, it's been probably 6 to 8 weeks now that we've been in this new world, but we are delivering on things, which is good, very good.
Also, what I heard from you is that you did a little bit in the learning space, went back to sales, came back to learning. So I think that would have given you a great feel for seeing it from both sides, and kind of alternating between suggesting, doing as an individual contributor, and then again suggesting, etc.
Yeah. So I agree with that. I think there was definitely a lot of experience that came out from leading different types of teams and applying that coaching idea to help people achieve what they need to do, who are your direct reports. And there's obviously KPIs and targets to meet in that space. And I think as a learning professional, you're kind of applying that to a much more broader audience and seeing how you can do similar things, but on a grander scale. So it really was a great learning curve, and it helped me. It's funny though, because a lot of learning people don't really come out of often the sales background. And so I can talk about some of the sales methodologies and things that are common within that sales environment. And people are a bit like, oh, really? Okay. I didn't realize you got, that's right. That's what you do in a sales role. So it's a bit surprising for people.
Yeah. I'm sure that gives you a little bit of a benefit, both in terms of understanding where the stakeholders are coming from, and also for them kind of believing that you understand it much better, so it's easier to work with possibly. Brilliant.
Yeah.
Excellent. Thanks for sharing that. We've spoken a few times in past, but this was a little new to me, so thank you. Lovely to know about that. Okay, Kirk, so our key area of discussion today is around learning engagement, and that's been our focus, for a few weeks now. So I thought maybe we'll learn a little more about what do you make of learning engagement. Your title was learning experience earlier. Are there similarities, overlaps between the two? Does it even matter if I talk of learning engagement specifically? What do you think?
Yeah, look, I did. I think that there is definitely some overlap, and the way I always look at it is more around learning engagement to me. And I think you're right that anyone can interpret this in any kind of way. It's very sort of movable and shiftable. But I see learning engagement as in the moment, so either in that particular session or when they're in that piece of learning, how engaged are they with that piece? Whereas learning experience, I feel, is a little bit more holistic, and it's looking at perhaps the end-to-end experience around, how they may access that learning or where they may access that learning, and how do you improve that experience or align it to other experiences that they expect, which might be, oh, well, I can watch Netflix on my phone and I can watch Netflix at home, and it picks up where I left off. I don't have to restart or anything like that. So that's all around that experience, and engagement is around how do you keep people on that piece of learning. Yeah.
So in terms of how we structure and make it available to people is contributing more to the experience part of it, but engagement is more specifically how you interact and engage with a piece of content or knowledge.
That's right. That's how I interpret it. But I think you're right. I think it definitely has some overlap. I think it's important to the conversation, absolutely, experience and engagement, however you choose to use it. But my interpretation is learning engagement is more around the way that they are end users or learners are interacting with a particular piece of learning, whether that be a facilitated piece of learning or a digital piece of learning, and the experience is kind of mapping out the whole sort of end-to-end piece.
Fantastic. And we all know that it is important, but what are your thoughts on why should an organization consider it to be important? What are the benefits or drawbacks, if you have it or if you don't have it, etc.?
I think, and I can speak from an Optus perspective here, we very much are trying to drive an organic learning culture and one that people will take themselves to, and this is where I think experience really comes into the play. So everyone's busy. Everyone has a lot of things that they need to do every single day, and learning or development or doing something outside of your day-to-day tasks is often not a focus and it's difficult to get people to do. So, or it's it's back of mind, it's not front of mind. So how do you improve that experience, drive a bit more sort of uptake or consumption of however you want to do it? And I think experience plays a big part in that, around just driving people to make a decision to engage with learning or not. Yeah.
I think there's a lot of what's in it for me comes into play even before they reach out for any learning piece.
Yeah. And there's a thing, and I'll go back to my sales background. There was a concept that was spoken about as that is you rate your experience based on your last experience. So if it was high effort and low value, then that's the expectation you place on that experience the next time you go there. High effort, low value. Will I bother going back and doing that again? Probably not. So you need to make sure that your experience is high value, low effort, and that'll keep people coming back to whatever it is that you're offering, whether it's a new product or it's a learning piece.
Yeah, great way to put it, Kirk, about high effort and low value. And like you said, once I experience that, I would be less inclined to go there again, and then even less. So I would think of it as a what I call it in my words is a downward spiraling of L&D brand. So eventually you are defeating that whole purpose by giving those kind of experiences.
Well, you make a decision every day, and everyone's time is important. And so every time you think about it, well, last time I went there, like I had to do this and I had to do that, and they fumbled up the thing. And I speak of this because it was a banking thing that we used to do in finance, was around how do you make the experience for a customer when they come through the door that it's high value and low effort for them. So what are we doing that's blocking that experience? How is it that we do the ID checks, or how is it that how long do they wait in the queue, and how many things do they need to do compared to what we need to do? So how do you sort of minimize that effort for the customer and increase the value for them? So and then there's a preconceived idea. So the next time you come through those doors, you almost cringe. Do you cringe or do you smile? Do you come through the doors and go, I know that this is going to be a good experience because last time it was, or last time they dropped it, they didn't charge me right, I had to go back in twice, they forgot to give me my ID back. All those create the experience for the end user.
I think it's a brilliantly simple way of trying to structure what you want to do, and I love it. There you are, where you're bringing in your sales experience into designing of learning experiences, and you're trying to put the customer at the center, because you're eventually thinking about how is she going to feel when she approaches a learning program, or a bank branch when they are entering a branch, etc.
Exactly.
Brilliant. I have been trying to go through a lot of learning theories in recent times, and motivation is so influenced by our perception of something, which is exactly what you're saying. If I know this is going to be a waste of time, and my perception is then deciding or influencing my motivation to go in again. Wow, that's
and then sometimes
that's fantastic. I just want to rephrase that.
All right. Thank you.
Yes, please go ahead.
You. I was just going to say, and sometimes you have to dangle a carrot to get the motivation initially, but if the experience doesn't meet expectations again, then people aren't going to bother coming back. And it's really around trying to entice people to be return shoppers or come back again. And how do you do that?
The same carrot won't work again and again.
Well, it'll work once, and then the experience has to be exceptional so that they choose to come back. You don't need to entice them back in again.
Absolutely. All right, that's fantastic. I mean, it gives me a great idea of how you have been thinking about it. Is there anything specific that you have been doing? If you want to jump into anything that you may have done to bring learning engagement to your initiatives, Any tools, technology that's been particularly helpful that you can share with us?
So I looked at this from all facets as well. So I considered not only technology, but also what we do from a facilitation perspective. So we have facilitation standards within Optus and a category of competencies within those standards are primarily around engagement. And what that is around, it's simple things like asking questions, asking participants to ask questions of you, using people's names is actually really a simple way to create engagement, that type of thing. Acknowledging ideas that are coming from participants as well. So what have they said? How can you use that within the context? Because they go, oh, my idea is valid, it's relevant, and it's contributing to the conversation. I'll do more. How do you make sure that the gentleman who's sitting in the back corner who's on his iPhone, how do you bring them into the conversation without singling them out, but also, you know, in a way that sort of creates that that inclusive sort of culture? And it's also about energy in the room as well. So, you know, things that you can do to create a bit of energy in the room, and that's from a facilitation perspective. But we have that as a standard and a measure around what our facilitators do when they're delivering content. And it's not just about standing and delivering information. It's around how do you make sure that the room is participating and engaged in whatever it is that we're doing. So that's from a facilitation perspective. So we do that. From a digital perspective, or even from design. So we it's things like the way things are formatted, word count, making sure that if you're doing digital learning that you're engaging all types of learners and all learning styles as well. And even sometimes it can come down to the way that you write a document, you know, using a written tone of voice as well as a verbal tone of voice as well when you're delivering, but writing in a particular tone of voice can help people read in that same way and engage a little bit more with the content. But I guess underneath our design, those design pieces, we've got some principles that support us around trying to make sure that engagement is key to everything that we pull together. So we've got 3 principles that we use, which are sustainable, accessible, and experiential. Sustainable is probably does support some level of engagement because it's around making sure that the piece of learning that we build is not always audience specific. And so by that I mean that you include less information, make it a little bit more general, and then the learner finds out more for themselves. So what action are they taking to go and find what that process may be, or what that price of that product might be? So rather than just handing it to them or serving it to them, show them where they can find that information and where it's housed, and ask the learner to go from point A to point B. So it's creating a bit of a journey, but it also means that I don't have to go back and update that learning every 6 months because the pricing has changed, or because we've got a new platform now that changes the process. I don't have to go back and change that learning because I'm just always pointing that learner out of that e-learning and into the source of truth, wherever that lives.
And that
accessibility.
And that could be simply a PDF. You know, the source of truth could be.
It could be a PDF. It could be the knowledge management system, whatever that might be. It could be, you know, some operational manual that people use. It could be anything. It could be like a Teams channel or a page that sits outside of the environment as well. It could be the Optus website, like it could be the corporate website, which customers have access to as well. Like all these resources that sit out there that are readily available, we don't need to replicate that information in that learning. And ultimately what that does is it helps learners to find their way, and means that they're engaging a little bit more in some of the other practices, not just sitting there clicking next on the learning.
Yeah, fantastic.
So that's one of our principles, is around sustainability, so that we don't have to build all the time. The other one that I thought of was, and another principle of ours is accessibility. And this is not just around accessible for diversity or people with any sort of disabilities, that type of thing. Absolutely, that's included in accessibility. But it's also about how you consume and where you consume it. So making sure that it's mobile enabled, that it's available to people to do offline, outside of the environment, away from their desk. And again, this means that people will engage with it how they want to engage with that learning, rather than what we demand that they engage with it. So we avoid desktop only as much as possible, and provide it so that it can be as multi-user and multi-device as possible. There's not really much more inaccessible, so that's pretty much it. But it does drive some engagement when people can make a choice around the way that they interact with that learning. Our last area or principle that we use is experiential, and this is probably the biggest piece. This is really around making sure that there's an action. So it's action-orientated learning. So there is an action that the learner needs to do in order to fulfill the requirement, close out the learning, do something. So what is that action? How do you make it be? And it could be navigate over to this pathway and see what that is. It could be write a journal diary around your experience around X. It could be make a commitment to what changes you're going to make within your team. It could be any of those things, but it's around making sure that there is an action item that the learner does somewhere along the line as part of that learning, because it's around that activity, and it's not just this is a static piece of learning that happens at 9:05 on a Tuesday morning. It's something that you may need to think about again at 3 o'clock on Wednesday afternoon, if you know what I mean. So there's lots of different opportunities to revisit that concept or that learning that you've done. So experiential for us is really around, one, how do you make the experience great, which I've sort of spoken about already, but also making sure that there's some level of action or an action item for the learner to perform.
So there's, maybe there are two levels of action items that you're talking of. One is probably while they're doing the learning program, and also after, in terms of what actions they will take when they go back to the jobs, etc.
And there's a level of ownership there as well. Like, we often place a lot of ownership on like a leader, and that's okay. Leaders should take a lot of ownership. That's not a problem. But learners can take ownership up, so you can own up as well, and you can, one of the action items be have a conversation with your leader about X, or tell your leader these are the commitments that you've provided to us. Again, so it's around, or find an opportunity to improve the process for something, and then have that conversation with your leader. So it's around initiating conversations between leaders and learners as well, so that they can leaders don't have to initiate that all the time. It's almost like giving permission to a learner to go up and drive the activity. Sorry.
Does the system facilitate that? So if I were to, put something after a program, does that go to my manager and both of us then have a conversation around it?
I would love that it would. Not to that degree. I know that there is some, like one of my other things that I've listed down here to talk about was Qualtrics. So we use Qualtrics as our learning evaluation system, and Qualtrics also does have the ability to trigger prompts out to individuals, and we haven't really explored it deeply yet because we've only just recently onboarded the platform. But ideally, it'd be great to sort of use it as that continuous learning approach, where you can, attend a session or complete something online, but then you also receive additional prompts that come through around, answer this one question or answer these two questions. And then the way that you respond to that might trigger a response to your leader. So you might answer it incorrectly, and the leader doesn't get the incorrect answer, but the leader gets a little prompt to say, Kirk might need a little bit more development around understanding this this process.
Yeah.
Maybe set some time up with him.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not about you got it wrong. Oh, it's more around what can we do to sort of continuously learn. That would be an ideal situation. We haven't explored it yet, but I know that something like that is possible.
Yeah.
So we just need to sort of.
I think that there's a lot of value in what you are suggesting and what you're trying to do there. I see it as one, of course, as you mentioned very clearly, you're not trying to assess them to, pass them or fail them, but to move them into the right direction and help them learn continuously. And also to bring in their managers into picture, because line managers, as I'm sure we've all realized, are really the crucial piece in making any learning effective eventually.
Yeah, they are, but they often don't have the tools, resources, information available to them to understand, and it's often a bit of a one size fits all approach. Like everyone has to get sheep dipped into this learning approach. So this might create a little bit more of a customized approach for leaders and give them some tools or info to make some better choices. That's all.
Fantastic. I mean, we'd love to learn more about how your Qualtrics journey goes, because that's
right now right now we're just using it for evaluations and surveys, but I want to explore the other facets of it as well. Just some other quick things, just quickly while we're talking still engagement tools. We use obviously MS Teams, so any type of collaboration tool will help with that engagement, something that you can, joke, be serious, share items, documents, information, connect digitally through chat and through voice is obviously a great thing. So something like MS Teams or WebEx, I think as well, can do it, or Zoom, or all of those sort of products are great in terms of that collaboration piece. We also use Menti as well, and we use that in facilitated sessions as well as online sessions, and it just helps to again create a little bit more engagement around specific questions, but also gives you real-time data that you can use in the session, so you can get really great responses. Call out, you don't have to call out individuals, but call out responses so that people kind of feel they can contribute in a safe environment, but you're still getting that interaction, and it sort of directs people away from a single point of view. They can look at a phone, or they could interact with it on their desktop in a different way. So there's some of the things that we use.
Thank you for sharing that. MS Teams, I know, is becoming one of the more popular ones for a lot of organizations for interacting and collaborating in real time. And Menti is a great tool for facilitation, and for, like you said, you had some frameworks for your facilitators to ensure that people are engaging, and that's where they can keep a check on the pulse of how much is everybody understanding. A majority of the class is not really getting it. Time for the facilitator to possibly take a step back and do a little more of examples or non-examples, or going a step down in terms of concepts, whatever.
And it's funny, I just thought that personalization that we do in facilitation can also come through for digital assets as well. So when you open something that says, "Hi Kirk, welcome to your learning," or "Hi Kirk, welcome to this," that actually does create a sense of engagement. And that's not a difficult thing to do. So personalization is a good thing as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Fantastic. Okay. Any other measures that you may have? Anything that you have been trying to capture in past before you started using Qualtrics or anything else in terms of overall success, or more specifically for how have you been keeping a tab on how engaged your people have been? People who have taken some programs.
It's a good question, and it right now is probably really difficult to measure, or effectively, I should say, measure effectively. It's facilitators in a room can measure or, ascertain in the moment whether or not they've got engagement with people. They could ask a question around content they've just delivered. If you can answer it, obviously you're paying attention. If you can't, you may not be. What can I do to fix that? You know what I mean? So they're making adjustments to those measures in the moment. I've also seen in the past some virtual engagement measures. I don't know how effective they are, but I've seen ones which give you a scale. I haven't seen it on Teams or anything like that yet, so it might be something that wasn't really that effective. But it talks about, it measures things like the interaction. So if there's conversation and there's 8 participants and 6 of them are contributing to the conversation, then your scale of engagement moves up. It measures things like if people are active in the chat, that'll also keep your engagement up. If they're interacting with the platform, so they might be clicking on things within the session as well, that'll also improve the engagement. And the person who perhaps is running that virtual session receives an ongoing sort of rating score, so they can sort of try and hit that. I actually haven't seen, that was quite some time ago I saw that against a different platform, but I haven't seen anything recently that sort of does measure like that. I think the other thing that we see is around some of the data that we can now get around digital assets, and that's probably more around, the time it takes to complete, what questions they get right or wrong, when they complete it, what time of day they complete it, where they complete it, on what type of device they complete it. So, which can help with some level of engagement, but also around how do you improve moving forward. So you take that data and go, oh, well, no one's really using it at this time, so not that it matters, but we can make sure that, I don't know, we don't launch then or we don't talk about it at that time, if you know what I mean. But I think it's difficult to measure that engagement at this moment right now.
Yeah, but
unless you've got something you want to share.
no, I'm very hopeful. So one, obviously a very valid point about, and that's something that's been missing from the digital world. When you had facilitators, they were really measuring engagement real time and modifying instructions real time. So instructional design was really getting modified based on the engagement level to ensure that you have decent level of engagement in a facilitation model. In digital, that's not the luxury we have, unless we probably leverage a lot more data, which is, about the journey that each individual is going through. And if we have programmed the solution in such a way that we can take them a level down or a level up, depending on how well they are doing. And that can be done using their data and also cumulative data. So yeah, possibly data is one area which I personally think can help us better personalize and give a better experience to the learners as well.
Yeah. I think there's probably more sophisticated measuring tools that are out there. I just haven't really seen them are widely implemented yet, if you know what I mean. But I think there will be something that will come through, because streaming services or whatever you want to use would have something like that just hasn't sort of, that they're using internally that hasn't gone to market yet, if you know what I mean. But I do think that's probably just a little bit of a challenge around measuring, apart from asking somebody to rate your experience on this particular piece of learning. There's not a heap of information, but we are getting more data, and I agree with you 100% that data that we can now get access to will drive a lot of that sort of conversation and result.
Yeah. I mean, XAPI is probably more capable than any of us have really been able to utilize it for. But yeah, I think it has a great promise for future. Definitely.
Absolutely.
Fantastic. Kirk, this has been very engaging and insightful. What advice would you have for, and I have 3 categories of people: senior management, learning leaders, and learning designers. If you have for all of them, great. but if for one or two of these also, on how they can bring learning engagement to what they do, or what they support.
That's a tough one, because I think often, particularly around that senior management component, and they're usually the ones that hold the budget. And I think sometimes it's about investing. It's investing in capability. It could be individual human capability, and it could be technology sort of capabilities that will support the engagement component. We at Optus have been trying to get a greater experience for our end users from our LMS for some time, and it's something that probably doesn't hold a huge amount of priority in the organisation, so therefore doesn't receive the budget that is required. And unfortunately, these things do cost money. So I think, you know, you kind of need to step off and make the decision to invest in that experience. For learning designers, I just always think around how else can you think outside the box. So what's happening outside of the learning industry, like I mentioned around Netflix and some of the stuff that they might have. This is the experience that people want to have moving forward. This is the way that they want to consume. So, and also people have a shorter retention span now, it seems. We may or may not, but it seems that we all have a shorter attention span. We get distracted so easily. So think about that as you're designing something, and how do you chunk it down. And I know we were all talking about micro-learning and all these smaller pieces, and that's absolutely the way to react. But I think don't always look at learning, like look at what else is happening out in the world of technology, so that you can sort of get ahead of the game, because we're always just slightly behind what's happening from a learning perspective. That's all. And think outside the box. Like I've spoken about this so many times with so many people. So if you've heard it before, you can tell me to be quiet. But I saw a coaching bot where it was like a prototype program that was run out of an organisation which I can't recall, and they had a group of new leaders who were learning about coaching and coaching their people, and they responded quite openly to a coaching bot who would regularly ask them questions around their coaching styles, how they're going with their coaching, what challenges they were facing, how they were feeling about the coaching. And the results and the interaction that these leaders had with this bot, it was something like 80% contribution rates. Like it was really, really high. Response rates were really quickly. So they'd get their little bot chat on their phone, and they would immediately respond. And the funny thing was too, is that they all knew that they were talking to a bot. So they knew that it wasn't perceived as being a human at the end. They knew they were talking to a bot. But it was this way that the questions were structured, enticed people to respond, but also it had that level of safety, because you're not responding to an actual individual, you are responding to a robot. And I always find that really interesting, that the fact that this organisation took a chance or tried something that was quite different, but it really was successful and worked really, really well. And then those leaders could apply that thinking to their direct reports. I just thought it was quite an unusual approach. And I think a lot of people would have said that's not going to work. People aren't going to interact with a robot for leadership coaching purposes, but quite the opposite resulted. And the other thing too, they had a really low dropout rate. So people continued throughout the whole program. I think it went for a few weeks, for example. And, you know, not only did they have really high response rates and a really high return, but people didn't drop off the program. So they continued right through to the end. Anyway, I thought that was really interesting. Yeah. So my point is around looking outside the box. What else can we do, and what are other leaders in tech and development doing that's not learning? and how can you sort of flip that as a learning piece?
I think there's a lot of inspiration outside that we can draw from. Marketing has been one area that a lot of people have looked at, and there are some great ideas that we can pick from marketing, certainly. Sales, like you said, there are things that we do in sales a little better than what we may be doing in L&D, and there are things that we can pick, like you mentioned about tech, robotics, chatbots. We'll see whether robotics impacts it or not. But chatbots is one area which is definitely very potent going forward. And you're right. I mean, it is actually a combination of things that may have worked there. We tend to associate human attributes to non-human things pretty quickly, like naming our car, like various things that we do in our lives, and so that's one. And the second is the safety of talking to a bot and being a little bit assured that I'm not revealing too much about myself, so I may be judged on it. So it could be a combination. But yeah, that's a great example. Great example.
And then for learning leaders, and this is something that we're doing here at Optus, just having that conversation then sort of triggered my mind, is that we need to, I guess, release the keys. So often in learning, it's very much around governance and ownership, and making sure that it's tightly held and it's super good quality and everything's absolutely perfect before it goes out to market, and it has to look and feel as great as it can be. I think learning leaders need to sort of relax a little bit more and understand that there might be some great learning that's coming out of non-learning professionals who just know their stuff really well, know their people really well, and know what sort of works for that audience, and not come in over the top and go, well, this is not right, and actually stop and listen and think about what's there. What we're doing at Optus, which is a little bit different, is we're creating a lot of assets that our end users can access and use and develop their own learning. So rather than it all sitting centrally and being developed by a development house as such, we're allowing that to sort of be freely available and ready, and we endorse it across all areas. And I guess some people might say, well, how do you manage quality, and how do you manage the what's right and what's wrong? And the reality is that the crowd will govern that. They will promote and endorse really good learning that comes out of that space, and they will reject and decline anything that's not. And any misinformation, they will find the owner and they will correct them. That's just what the crowd does. And so I guess you have to have faith in your people that they will support what is great and not what is not great, so to speak. So that's I think that's probably a lesson for learning leaders, is to sort of relax a little bit more and sort of open the doors a little bit. It's been working well for Optus.
How long have you been doing that, the user generated?
It's been a bit of a journey now for probably a year or so, but it's only really kicked off in the last maybe 4 months in reality. So in fact, we've talked about it a lot, but we haven't demonstrated it really, really well. Whereas now we have a dedicated space that people can go to, and they can pick up assets, and they can go, oh, okay, I'm delivering a quick session. Again, we used to centrally manage that. Now anyone can pick it up. We have access to storage as well. So if people do develop something and they want to keep it as part of the suite of learning, we can give them access to a centralized storage facility that we manage, but they can use as they need to, so that we can sort of collate all that great learning that's happening out in the organization, and it doesn't get lost in the ether, or when somebody leaves, it's sitting on their email. So we're trying to encourage a little bit more of that, and sharing and storing, so that we don't lose it all. But it seems to be going really quite well. People just picking it up and doing what they need to do.
That's a brilliant story, and you said you kind of picked steam on that very recently, but we would love to chat a little more about that. 2 points there quickly. Number one, I think the fears of anybody doing anything and the quality being very bad is a little unfounded, because social media or media of this kind, where more people view what you are saying, has its own self-governing uh, algorithm, and people don't want to look stupid. People don't want to be seen as somebody who's creating a negative environment. So even if they do those things in private, they would not do it on a channel which is open to everyone.
Yep.
So typically
Yep.
people don't do. And also, I think there is a lot, and you touched on one, which is capturing knowledge of people who may be leaving the organization, because there is a lot of benefit in this. There's a lot of analysis we can do with the data. What is the kind of content most people are reacting to? What is the kind of questions they are asking to what has been already put up? Has that been answered by someone? Should we create a actual program on it, now that there is a lot of material that is gathering up, and people have more questions than that are getting answered? It's like there's a lot of data that we can capture, and it is better than a survey that we can do. We can never do a survey around such things, which is really giving us the pulse. These interactions can give us a great pulse on what people are thinking, what they're struggling with, what they're really liking, etc. So there's a good thing going. And as I said, at some point I would like to talk to you about that in more detail.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd love to, because you see very much around it's giving you data around, well, what's the problem that everyone's trying to solve for, and or it's like, what's everyone searching on Google? That tells you what's the next thing that needs to get built, if you know what I mean, like all that information. So it's it is a good a good approach. And also the other, it sort of right back what I was talking around sharing best practices. Here's something that somebody else has prepared earlier. We've got this problem that we need to solve for. It's about this. Oh, we know that somebody else has already built this. Here you go. It's done. So it helps with that, like, immediate knowledge share as well.
Yeah. And one natural benefit that the organization gets is people who are real experts in a certain area, they get recognized, and they feel that they are getting recognized, not just because one person says so, but because the larger organization recognizes them an expert in this area. And that actually brings down their turnover. They would not leave the organization because they are so well recognized. So, there are so many benefits of this. And that's why I said, we will have a deeper conversation on this at some time.
That's actually a really good point too, that you just touch on. And it's not so much even the engagement of end users, but it's also the engagement of people who are providing the content. We're talking engagement here, but if you get a buzz from people liking your stuff, you're more likely to produce more. And then that in itself is engaging our end users to engage with learning more. It's actually quite a big cycle around, and you're right, around employee engagement too. Like, if they get a buzz or recognition from providing that good work, then they're more likely to stay. And recognition is a huge piece of around that we haven't really even touched on, like things like badges and leaderboards and all that sort of stuff to help people get engaged with learning. Which is almost part two of this conversation. But yeah, we haven't touched on anything like that. But recognition is a huge piece around helping people sort of engage with anything.
It is certainly. Kirk, this has been fascinating and very, very insightful. As I said earlier, very engaging. I really loved it. Thank you so much.
Really good chat.
Thank you so much.
Really appreciate it, and it was very enjoyable, and it felt just like a really nice conversation. Just two learning professionals shooting the breeze in the afternoon. It was really good. I really appreciated it.
Well, thank you for your time. You have a wonderful day.
You too. Thank you.